so you don't have to stop.
Perfect. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. We are very excited to have our first community conversations this month. We're going to have one every single month of the year, just to highlight some of the different awareness months that are going on. So I will be kind of facilitating the conversation today. I am Panayota Papadopoulos, here with Turning Point of Lehigh Valley, the training and education advocate. Our two guest speakers for today are Catharine Kessack, who's also from Turning Point and is our Housing Advocacy Director. And we also have Nani Cuadrado, who is here as Heal Trafficking as the Director of Education through Heal. So good morning, guys.
Hi. Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I know part of the discussion really that wraps around domestic and intimate partner abuse as well as trafficking is this idea of power and control, right? Where ultimately, I know with domestic and intimate partner abuse, we talk about how, it is a pattern of coercive control where the abuser is trying to maintain or gain that level of control over the survivor. How does that tie in with the work that you do, and how do you see those levels, those dynamics of power and control come into play with what you do?
Catherine, I don't know if you wanted to answer that first, and then when we can kind of.
Yeah, I can start. So in domestic and intimate partner violence, threats are used, intimidation, there's emotional abuse, isolation. I mean, I think isolation is key, right? That they won't have any influence, no friends, separated from families usually, minimizing, denying and blaming, use of privilege, male privilege, you typically, and then economic abuse, having absolutely no access to any form of income.
Yeah, I know a lot of times with, domestic and intimate partner abuse, or DIPA, as we often call it, and at Turning Point, that we often think of physical abuse in the media and society, but there's so many other levels of emotional abuse, financial abuse that show up, digital abuse, cyber abuse, stalking, that show up even more frequently than we see that physical abuse level. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. Nani?
Yeah, Catherine's hit a lot of it. And I think in the work that Heal Trafficking does, we work with labor trafficking as well as sex trafficking. And I think the only thing that I would probably add in the control is thinking about immigration status. So many folks, especially in Pennsylvania, come to our area to work in fields and are legally actually invited to the country to help supplement farmers' work. And but that also puts them in a place of vulnerability and lack of control, because their whole status for being in this country is based on work that is being done. And if an employer isn't happy with what they're doing, that even though it starts off as being, I think, a good thing to supplement work being done, it can also be a control thing, because having not a lot of control about why you stay here or if you're allowed to stay in this country to do work is also part of that. Plus, as I think Catherine talked about, it's just the plain vulnerability of poverty. So if you have poverty, anyone that supplements anything to do with providing housing, providing clothing, providing food, has a sense of power over a particular person who is vulnerable to that. So I think when you talk about power, it's even sometimes folks like us that are doing good work, we have as a provider power, because we're the ones that are providing care. So I think we have to also think about how the work that we do can be difficult and almost entrapping sometimes if we're not careful, that we are the ones that have power. You're the one, Catherine, that has housing. I have healthcare. So we have to also be careful of our control as well.
That's a really good point in just, being aware of, even if we're in a helping position, that it's important to recognize that we are not taking over somebody else's power who is joining. I know that's something that we talk about a lot in our trainings, where where the empowerment piece comes in. So I guess a question that I had was, when dealing with, survivors, I think a lot of times they don't always recognize everything that they've been through, or even recognizing that it is some level of abuse or power and control dynamics. So how do you encourage that empowerment piece when dealing with survivors?
What can I start with that, Catherine? Because that's
Yeah.
something I feel very passionate about. I think I mean, even you think about this in education, how teachers have power over their students. And again, not as a lording over their students kind of way, but there is a sense of that. And I think as people that are caring for others, one of the things I've always felt was part of the healing process is doing the opposite of whatever circumstances that they've been in. So if they've been isolated, creating community, if they've had their voice kind of squashed, then giving them voice. So I think what we can do as we get to know our patients, our victims, the persons that we're working with, is as we get to know them and they share what's been taken from them, we can help to encourage the opposite of that in order to start the healing environment that they need to thrive. So so I think about that. So what's the opposite? Even in the ER, if somebody comes in and they want they're hungry, even giving them a choice of what we have to eat to offer. It sounds so simple, but that's just kind of the beginning of having a choice, not, here's a blanket, like, would you like a blanket? Things like so simple is something that we can get better at as providers, I think.
I know another one I heard is even just asking, how would you like to refer to either yourself as a survivor, as a victim, as, not just a person, or how to refer to your abuser as well is another big piece of that for sure.
Yeah, and I'll add in, at Turning Point, we use an empowerment model in everything that we do. So whether the individual is working with one of our legal advocates or community advocates, voice and choice is always at the forefront. And that's part of trauma-informed care. So that's a really important thing that we do to start to give them that power back and show them that they have a voice and they're seen and they're heard in all the work that we do. Nani talked about community, and I believe community heals. So it was really in the safe house specifically over the holidays, just seeing all the families coming together and really enjoying and having, even though they weren't in their own home, I call the safe house their home because it's where they live and they live together, and just to see the support and the meals that they made and the sense of community that happened. It's really a gift to be able to walk alongside their journey of growth as they start to heal.
Yeah. I know a big piece that we talk about in the training, our training team as well, is just remembering that I think sometimes as, support staff or just trying to be that supportive person in somebody's life who might be going through this, it's very easy to lean on like, oh, you need help. Let me immediately jump in to try to fix this for you, right? So let me grab this for you, or let me help you call this person or whatnot, and kind of jumping in to take that role away. But you're right, the voice and choice, right, as you called it, is so important, because otherwise we're really doing the same exact thing of taking away somebody else's power and control over how they want to proceed, what they want to do moving forward. So all of this being said, I know that a lot of times we talk about how it is so much more common than we realize that survivors are often hiding in plain sight, right? It is this, in its own way, right? An issue worldwide, but even just in this area, right, in the Lehigh Valley. What are some of the signs, whether subtle or more overt, that we might be able to recognize to help support survivors that are going through either trafficking or domestic and intimate partner abuse?
Catherine, did you want to get started? I
I mean, I could speak to both really.
Sure.
You know, for intimate partner violence, you know, maybe the isolation, you know, you'll notice isolation, them not leaving the house, maybe not showing up for appointments. You know, we talked that physical violence isn't always there. So, you know, you might hear a comment by their partner that is kind of, you know, speaking down to them. So that's that, you know, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. You might see parental alienation happening, you know, where the children won't get along with the victim, but will get along with the abuser. I think I'll kind of start there and let Nani take it off from the.
Yeah.
I think, thanks, Catherine. One of the things that we, as healthcare providers, and I'm going to say as us, because it's whether you're a social worker or whether you're a mental health provider or a healthcare provider, what we're not always good at, and I think I've had to unlearn some behaviors and even some terminology that was taught to me as a medical provider. But when somebody is a horrible term, but I think everybody will know when you've heard someone say non-compliant, maybe they don't show or they're not, you know, taking their medications, or they're showing up late for appointments, or they're not showing up at all for appointments. I think what we can do better as providers is ask why. And so when you ask about like, what are the signs and symptoms, all the things that Catherine mentioned are signs and symptoms, but when taken in isolation, it just seems like, well, that person doesn't take their blood pressure medication. Well, maybe they don't have the money because they're working migrant work on a farm and that has not been offered to them. So they can't pay for diabetes medications, not because they don't want to, but because they don't have insurance and they don't have the funding to do that. Or maybe they don't show up on time for their appointments or at all for their appointments because the person that was supposed to take them, their boss was supposed to take them to the doctors and then decided they had to work in the fields instead, or decided that in the case of, you know, sexual violence or domestic violence, maybe that was held over as control. Well, you know, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, so I'm not going to take you. And so I think what we have to do as providers, when you ask like, what are the signs and symptoms, is we have to look at the person as a whole and kind of ask why. You know, why isn't somebody coming on time to their appointment? Why isn't somebody, you know, taking their medication when they say they're taking it? And I think as a friend and as a provider, we can start to unpack the whys, and that tells a better story than just kind of looking at persons as that symptom that they came to see us or that one problem. I think we just have to dig a little bit deeper as we build relationships with the people that we're caring for. And I think whether it's a neighbor or whether it's a friend or whether it's somebody that is placed in our care, I think that's where we can get better. Is the signs and symptoms are a whole story. And often we see one story. I see the rash that they came to see me for, but I don't necessarily see that the reason for the rash is because they're sleeping in a hallway because they don't have a place to live, and that is a wet area that's why they can't afford the medicine, so that's why they're not taking it. So I think signs and symptoms are part of a whole story. And I think if we get better at getting to know people and building those relationships, we'll get a better story in order to realize that signs and symptoms were always there. We just were looking at them in isolation.
One thing that came to mind as Nani was talking is that, you know, trafficking as well as intimate partner abuse are both forms of complex trauma. So it's, you know, continually happening over and over again. So there could be trauma triggers that you might recognize in someone, like they hear a loud noise and they get spooked, or a horn honks, or they hear a boom. I mean, that could be a warning sign as well. And that I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that
Yeah.
was important too.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there's those levels of, if you think of it like an onion, right? The survivor is sort of at the center of the onion, but there's all these extra layers that we have to peel back to understand really what is it's not just this isolated symptom or this isolated event. There's all these extra layers that play into really what
Oh,
the
wait,
survivor is going through.
you just hit something I want to
Yeah,
mention, because
please.
I feel like this is where the conversation kind of unpacks. As persons that care for others that have been victims of violence, of any kind of violence, what we often look at, and what I was trained, is that you look for people that are scared and you look for kind of fearful. And so it's almost easier if we're looking for that then we would want to intervene and kind of ask a few more questions. But what I was not trained, and I think you all can attest to this, is that in order to survive outside, whether it's labor trafficking, sex trafficking, intimate partner abuse, you have to be tough. And so what that does is it creates not necessarily fearful, but it creates an attitude. Like, what better way to protect yourself is if you just ooze like attitude. And I think no one taught me that. And so what I realized is every survivor we've ever met with is they're already prepared to be put into downplayed, not believed. And so what that does is creates this sense of like, forgive me, but screw you. It's this attitude of like,
Like a defense mechanism. Yeah.
It's a great defense, but self-preservation is like at the core of attitude. And so I feel that if we were taught that as providers to dig deeper for people that have attitude, it's self-preservation at its best. And so why aren't we thinking a little bit differently when we're meeting somebody? I mean, you go into the ER and someone's like, good luck in room 2, because that person's got a lot of stuff going on and they just want to get out of there. Well, why do they want to get out of there? Why are they so angry? And I think we haven't been taught to really dig deeper in that. We look for meek and scared, and that's not what the people that I'm sure all of you can attest to that we work with. They're like oozing all kinds of feistiness, and we have to kind of dig deeper in that. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that too, because I think that was something that was not taught. I just noticed that was kind of a common denominator of all this, people that we've worked with, survivors literally are surviving out there, and they've got all kinds of good stuff and strengths that we look at as, feisty.
I don't know if you had anything to add, Catherine.
No, I was just,
okay.
Nani and I have overlapped on many clients. So a few come to mind, and I had completely forgotten about that. Some people will think, I don't want to work with this person. They're hard to work with. Well, like Nani said, like that's a strength of theirs, right? That's how they're getting through every day. That's how they're surviving. Is that they're choosing fight instead of flight, which is a strength.
Yeah, and in a way, it's not like it is, yes, a defense mechanism, self-preservation, but at the same time, it's also a level of self-advocacy that I think that we don't learn from a young age, that I think needs to be sort of taught, and a skill that is developed. So, in a way, I think it is a strength that's able to happen. Nani, that sort of leads me to a similar question, but how does public opinion of survivors or public perception complicate your work and what you do?
Oh God, that's a whole unlearning. It's really what we have to do to just kind of, in order to find folks that need help, we don't have to rescue. Like what the learning that I feel like we need to do, and how it complicates it, is that when people finally do learn about intimate partner violence and what that might look like, and human trafficking, labor, and sex, that they're horrified, first of all, and then the next step is wanting to kind of rescue. And I feel like that is so detrimental to the work. And so that we get in our own way. And I think what we can also do as part of training and kind of creating awareness is, as we're talking about human trafficking, intimate partner violence, what is our goal? Our goal is not to rescue. Our goal is to surround this person with enough love that eventually they're going to say, like, I'm ready. I'm ready to leave the situation that I have, and I'm going to come back to you because you were so kind and you didn't judge me. And I feel like that's part of the unlearning. We get in our own way, and we get the sense that we have to rescue, which is always, it makes me cringe when I hear people say that word, because it's really, survivors don't need to be rescued. They just need to be given a door and an opportunity. And when they're ready, they'll let us know, but we just have to kind of pave that way. So the answer is kind of a long one, because I feel like we do get in our own way, and getting out of our own way is probably the best thing that we can do. And the thing that is a barrier for us is that we think that we have to go in and rescue when we finally, identify someone that is, in a intimate partner violence or in, a victim of some kind of violence. We feel like we have to do something about it right then and there. And it just, sometimes timing is not right. And so I think we just have to be realistic about what our goal is as healthcare providers or as providers of care of any level.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with that word rescue. I find it derogatory in this work because it really is the individual that makes the choice. And like Nani said, you surround them with love and support. And I wanted to go back to public opinion, and for intimate partner violence it's why don't they just leave? Well, leaving is hard, right? Think of that power and control wheel. They have no money, they have no resources, they feel very devalued, and it's one of the unsafest, it is the unsafest time for that individual seeking to flee. So it's not as easy as why don't they just leave? And then on the trafficking side, a lot of the individuals that are being trafficked have a substance use disorder, right? Because they've been having to perform these sexual acts. So, and the trafficker will sometimes use substances as a form of control. So they're just a drug addict. They're just sitting on the corner, tricking themselves to get their next hit of dope, right? That's not the case. I mean, they do have trauma. But again, that's a public opinion that someone's choosing that life. Very, very few choose to have sex over and over again with multiple partners. So I wanted to bring that up too, Nani.
Yeah. It's funny because you brought up like 3 different questions that I had all at the same time. So, and as we're talking, if anyone has any questions for the presenters, please feel free to type them in the chat. And as we, go through, we'll get to them. But you're right. I think why don't they just leave is this common myth, this common perception that it should be easy, like we'll just get up and go. And if you do have that feistiness, right, that self-advocacy level, it should be easy enough to just be like, well, again, excuse my language, but like, screw you, I'm out. But it really isn't as simple as just leaving. I know specifically with domestic and intimate partner abuse, I mean, the statistics show that it's 75% more likely to become a lethal situation when somebody chooses to leave their partner. Because again, the abuser is recognizing that they're losing that level of power and control that they had. So they might escalate in that way to maintain that level of control. That's why on average, it takes about 7 times for somebody to try to leave their situation before they actually choose to leave on average. So that could be more or less, whatnot. So I'm sure with trafficking, it's very similar where, it's not as simple as whether it be labor trafficking or sex trafficking. So I don't know if Nani being the director of education, I'm sure you have a little more knowledge to that than I, could provide, but yeah.
No, you actually utilized a statistic that we try to share with providers as we're educating them, that we don't know if this is their first time they're seeking healthcare. So the secret, I always feel like providers are like the secret sauce and the secret weapon of human trafficking, because studies show, and there's tons of different types of studies, from anywhere from 68 to 85% of persons seek healthcare while they're being trafficked. So what that means is that we really do have a great opportunity to kind of build these relationships with folks to really be prepared when they are ready, whether it's that first time that they're seeking care while they're being trafficked, or it's their 7th time. We really don't know where they are in the spectrum of care and of their trauma to know when they're going to be ready. And we just don't know that. But that, as we start building relationships, Catherine, I know, can speak to this, that we still don't overlook the importance of having a safety plan and helping persons to have one, whether they're, if they've spoken that they are in a tough situation, whether it's labor, sex, intimate partner violence. I think that's also the hardest part too, is that when we say intimate partner violence, I'm happy that that has been added as a term, because I think we often overlooked when we said domestic violence, is just it didn't really highlight the importance of the relationships that were intimate. And I think that that happens in labor trafficking, it happens in sex trafficking, it happens in intimate partner violence, because literally it is the partner that is holding that kind of control. And so I think there is love at some point, and then there was dependence. And I think that's what we forget, is that it's so complex, because that partner met a need. And we can go through the whole hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you meet needs, then that person that is dependent on having those needs met becomes then easily a victim, because needs are being met. So like Catherine shared, it's not just about love or the abuse, but it's about the needs that are being met, that you take that person out of their picture. And while abuse might be gone, a lot of those needs now then aren't being met. So what are we doing to kind of work through that with our clients or patients?
Yeah. And oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add to Nani about, safety planning and our helpline. So if we have a caller that calls the helpline and they identify as being a victim of intimate partner violence, but they're not ready to leave, we'll safety plan with them, and then usually we always will connect with a service that can continue to support them. So I see Miriam, who's our director of community advocates, on. So we would reach out to a member of her team and connect them with a community advocate who can provide that empowerment counseling and to work through what does that safety plan look like, and work with them until they are ready to leave, if they choose to leave, throughout that safety planning process. So it's not just a piece of paper that we make today, it's continually changing based on the individual's needs.
It's interesting that you mentioned a piece of paper. That I think that's something that's often mentioned in regards to protection from abuse, or a PFA order. When we talk about safety planning, that, trying to receive that restraining order, that PFA order. I heard a really good analogy the other day, that it's kind of like getting car insurance, right? Getting car insurance doesn't stop you from getting into an accident, but it does help hold the person accountable. So I don't know if there's anything in regards to, from the legal perspective, or just in general from the housing perspective, that you would like to share in regards to that.
We had a legal advocate, but I think she had to hop off because she had to go into court. But a PFA, if the victim is on the lease, is on the mortgage, they can get a PFA, and the abuser can be evicted from the property. And then our teams can supply the survivor with supplies such as security cameras, door bars, things that will make them feel safer at home. If that isn't the case, if they can't be exited because the survivor is not on the lease or the mortgage. And we try and find safer alternatives, so that could be, and again, that isolation makes it tough. So sometimes we don't have a support system anymore. But we really try and work on that. And if they do want to file a PFA and they are not safe, then we would look at bringing them into the safe house if they're in imminent danger, I should say.
I don't know if Nani wanted to add anything.
I just saw a question had come up, and I don't know
Yeah.
if we want to give some time to address that.
Yep.
Dee Balicki, thanks for sharing your story with us, and as far as empowering parents to kind of think about what they can do to protect their kids. It's really hard to think about how, as a parent, we can, especially when you know all this information, how do you love your teenagers and still give them some agency, but don't helicopter them? It's hard. So I want to first say teenagers are brilliantly smart and can figure out how to get around parents no matter what. My kids are in their 30s now, and I'm only now hearing stories that they're sharing about things that they did when they were teenagers. I'm like, oh God, it's a good thing I didn't know that. But so forgiving yourself, first of all, you can't ever think that we know things as well as we would like to as parents, because kids are so freaking clever when they want to be. So I think some of the things that we can start to notice, though, as parents is, isolation. The kids that maybe they used to hang out with together, it's maybe not the same crowd, and it's a different kind of crowd that they're not necessarily willing to bring around to your house. So changes in friends, changes in grades. Some can really power on grades even through all this trauma. So sometimes grades is not always, helpful, but changes in behavior, changes in clothing, more defiance than what's normal for a teenager. How do you know what's defiant and what's not? I think for me, what I would share with parents and is just changes from what is not your daughter or your son. What has happened in their life? Who have they met where they're maybe not as joyful, or maybe they're going out more, or just, I think that to me is, your kids better than anyone, and what's like normal behavior and what has changed. And I think that's where we can be vigilant as parents, is figuring out the why. Again, it's almost like the healthcare provider issue is, it's more than just noting behavior. It's trying to figure out the why, and the change of the behavior is what I think is helpful if parents start looking at things a little bit differently. I hope that helps. And thank you for sharing your story. I don't know if Catherine, you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I think you hit all the points, Nani. And, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine, just those changes in behaviors and isolation, new friend groups, or not talking to their best friends. If I'm thinking was probably, you don't have an age on here, but working with Valley Youth House leads me to believe that she probably was a teen. They're good at hiding things, right? Like Nani said, her kids are in their 30s. Okay, yeah. So she's a minor. Mary, you're on the call. Do you have anything you could add from the children and teen perspective?
I was going to say, so February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So Mary is going to be one of our featured speakers for next month. But Mary, you're welcome to hop in if you'd like.
Hi, everyone. Apologize in advance. My 8-month-old is in my arms right now, so she might start crying at any moment. But I think, Nani, you hit everything that comes to mind when you speak of like red flags. I think the isolation is huge, but also just any specific changes that are not of the norm for your children. I would, you know, just try and sit down and have a conversation with them as to what's going on, and keep that door open no matter what they tell you, to just allow them to be open and honest with you about what's going on in their life, and try not to give any unsolicited advice, because that might close the door immediately. So,
Yeah.
and then I was going to add, we will be having a conversation specifically on teen dating violence in February. So,
yeah.
Thank you, Mary.
So
yep.
that's everybody's little brief intro to February's community conversation, I guess. And then you can actually hopefully meet Mary or visually. But yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that is important to note is that, you know, especially in the teenage ages, you know, kids are starting to develop their social group. They are starting to date. And a lot of this often begins, that cycle begins in grades 6 to 12. So it's, you know, we state that, especially again with domestic and intimate partner abuse, that it's 1 in 3 women go through some level of abuse, 1 in 4 men, so it's really not that far off, and 1 in 3 teens, 1 in 3 who identify as LGBTQ+. So, you know, it's really not that far off for teens either. Just because, you know, they're a little bit younger doesn't mean that they're not going through a lot of the same things. And a lot of times that's where they sort of solidify that level of what relationships look like, what is healthy, what is unhealthy. You know, if I've grown up in a household or in an environment, in a social setting where certain behaviors are the norm, I might not even recognize that as an unhealthy or abusive factor. Where, you know, especially if we're thinking of isolation, again, is one that we've mentioned a couple times, that, you know, it's really important for teens to be around their partner, and, or even adults, you know, just that level. But something that we keep kind of tiptoeing around is this level of complex trauma and how this often comes back up. So I know that we talked about sort of the survivor being at the center of the onion, as we said, right? The center of all of it, making sure that we're asking why, making sure that we are understanding that it's not just the symptoms, but really there's like there's this underlying person underneath all of these symptoms. But what are some of the, would you say, most common risk factors that might lead somebody into either human trafficking or domestic and intimate partner abuse, or things that often make the situation more complex and not as easy to leave or to, you know, go about their life?
Catherine and I had talked about this question because I think it's such a rich one. And I think I mentioned it a little bit, and we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so while we tend to think as vulnerabilities being, like, in my mind, the number one thing that will make someone at risk, so that means they're vulnerable. But what does that mean? It means that their needs are being met by somebody else. So whether it's housing needs, emotional needs, mental health needs. So all these needs that we have to make us feel whole are being met by somebody that uses those needs to control. So I feel like to the teenager, to the mom whose teenager, you know, had a boyfriend, what needs did that boyfriend meet? And I think, you know, that sense of belonging, that sense of, you know, agency, where you can make your own choices and you can decide to date this person or not. And so I feel like risk factors are when somebody else is meeting a need. If you have poverty and your employer is saying, I'll give you a job and then you can pay your debt down, or you can, you know, help your family. I think those are vulnerabilities. And so I think we just have to think pretty simply about vulnerability. And that's just when somebody else is meeting a need or many needs that somebody has, that's when there's a risk factor. Catherine, you have other things to add?
Oh, I think it really goes for both, right? For intimate partner violence as well as trafficking. to fill that need. And the first word that came to my mind was love bombing, right?
Mm.
So if somebody is not feeling good about themselves, or has a low self-esteem, or is feeling isolated, and someone comes along and is constantly telling them how beautiful they are and bringing them flowers and buying them fancy gifts, and you get sucked in pretty quick. And then that power and control cycle starts. And that's really for both intimate partner violence and trafficking. And then you love that person, and it's hard to, separate the violence from the love, right? Like, they might tell themselves, well, it was my fault because I didn't do the dishes, or it was my fault as a trafficking survivor because I didn't bring in my quota that night, or it was my fault because I was sick, or so a number of things. So that was the word that came to my mind.
Yeah, there's often this layer of that cycle of abuse, right? Where that's why it becomes this sort of escalating pattern over time that, oftentimes it does start with that level of love bombing, with that level of everything seems great, and then tensions build up, and then, there's some sort of escalation. But then oftentimes the abuser will come back. I'm sure it's similar in trafficking, where the abuser will come back and say, like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. Or might even turn it back onto the survivor, like, I only did this because you did, whatever the case may be. So there's this level of, like you said, that guilt or that shame that comes with it. Sometimes even that layer of, like, well, everyone else, social media is, one of the most difficult things with this, where everyone else seems like they're in this healthy, happy relationship. Why can't I be in that too? So it kind of becomes that level of internalized shame and blame. Absolutely. What is the best piece of advice you can provide to any listeners who might be going through something along these lines, or indirectly trying to support somebody who is?
I thought about that a lot when you kind of gave me some of the questions ahead of time. And I think that was it's an insightful thing. And I think the best, I think, is the unlearning of rescue, that what our goal is as a human being is to be present for our friends, our family, our clients, our victims, patients, whatever you want to say. And if we are present, there will be a sense of safety that eventually, if somebody is having a difficult situation, we can be there to ask the right questions at the right time. And I think there's nothing magical. You don't need a medical degree. You don't need an associate's. You don't need a master's to be present. And I think sometimes we make it such a heady thing, trafficking and violence, that we don't know that really the difference can be just being present to listen. And that's really the seed that gets planted, is that you show yourself as a kind, listening, non-judgmental person. And eventually, with that kind of relationship, somebody is going to want to share, and you will ask the right question, and then get answers to be present. So I think that it's a long answer, and that's really being present, to be that kind heart that will eventually be ready to open the door for somebody to get help. Not necessarily to be the one that carries them through the door, but opens the door and is present.
Nani stole my thunder. I always use in the work that we do is we plant seeds, right? So advice, I don't really like that term, because we use the empowerment model. So I would never give someone advice. I would talk through a conversation with them and let them make those choices based on the conversation. But I always say, when somebody is getting frustrated, like any member of my team, is that we're planting seeds right now. This is important, right? We're planting this garden. We're going to nourish that garden. And we might not see that garden come to fruition, but we've planted those seeds. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you mentioned it takes 7 times for someone to actually physically leave. that on that 7th time when they leave, that flower has grown full blossom because we planted those seeds, you know, a year ago. So if anybody is, you know, you did mention if anybody on this call is experiencing intimate partner violence or trafficking, you know, that we have our helpline that you can call at Turning Point, and we answer that 24/7 to listen, right? Like Nani said, listen. That's what we do. We listen a lot. And then we connect you to the necessary resources, whether that's internal or external. And then from trafficking perspective, there's, you know, 3 different local agencies throughout the Lehigh Valley, as well as the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and then there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline as well.
Yeah, so I'm gonna put our hotline in the chat. I don't know if you know the other ones off the top of your head, that we can also provide those in the chat for anyone who might need them. But yeah, absolutely. You can also always visit our website for any of this information as well, just turningpointlv for lehighvalley.org. Nani, I don't know if you have any specific either educational things that are coming up that you might want to highlight, or just local resources as well. Thank you.
I'm also going to put down Heal Trafficking's website. It's such, I mean, before I even joined Heal as an employee, I've been using them for 5 years as a resource. So it's made up of more than 40,000 persons, more than it's more than 50 countries. Like it's I put in the website, the human trafficking hotline, and also the Heal Trafficking website. It's just an amazing source of assistance. If what Heal Trafficking does is helps organizations to create protocols, do trainings, and it's all with different providers. So we just did a whole bunch of work with a national hotel chain, just speaking to their managers of hotels and just kind of trying to understand risk factors. So I think if you have not had a chance, take a look at the website, and feel free, if you think of questions after the fact, to reach out to me. You can see me on the website, and we can dig deeper with training. And that's why it was such a good idea to blend intimate partner violence and Turning Point with Heal Trafficking, because there's such an overlap in the vulnerabilities. And so happy to talk and dig deeper, you know, for anyone that needs it.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to ask if there are any other questions for our presenters. Feel free to offer them in the chat. I guess as one final question from me. So I know I've recently been taking the turnpike often to visit some friends, and I know that every time I stop and use the restroom, there's this, you know, trafficking has this universal hand symbol. And I know with, you know, abuse or sexual assault, there's often this level of you know, like an angel shot. If you're out, like order the angel shot, and then, you know, the bartender might be able to help you. And there's this level of, you know, sharing this information, which helps promote that level of awareness and support, but also making it public might also allow the abusers to know that information as well, and potentially put the survivor at further harm. So I guess my question is, you know, do you find these things helpful? Do you see them often? Or if not, what would be the best way for community supporters to help survivors get the help safely, but also privately, in a way that they're not further putting them at risk?
I think we can do
There's a lot in that, sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot. The angel shot, that's a hard one, because I feel like the more we let people know about it, I mean, you have to train staff and also the people to use it. So then it will become something that, like you said, abusers might understand and get to know. One of the things that I found that I didn't do well, and we as healthcare providers, is we never provided a human trafficking hotline number. 100% of the persons that were in the shelters for sex trafficking victims didn't know that there was a human trafficking hotline number. So that means that we didn't do a good job in sharing that. So I think whether it's domestic violence hotline, that should be kind of shared, and we need to get better at that, whether we're giving it on a piece of paper or a shoe card or something they can stick in their bra or what have you. I think we just need to get better at sharing resources so that people actually know that there's help. And that's where the education can come in. And I don't know, Catherine, I'm sure you see that a lot of people didn't even realize there was that hotline. And so I feel like that we can get better at sharing those juicy bits of, information that can provide resources when people are ready.
Yeah, and just think about the last time you went to the doctor. They always do an intimate partner violence screening, but they don't do that for trafficking victims. However, Nani, in her great self, was able to bring that to LVHN. So now they do have a screening protocol. Well, they're rolling it out, which is really important. So now not only will we be screening for intimate partner violence in our doctor's offices, but we will also be doing the same in the LVHN hospital system, which is awesome. And
Thanks for the plug.
Hey, we worked on it together.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Thank you guys for everything that you've done. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you to those who came and are listening. I hope that you were able to gain something from this conversation. I do want to briefly highlight that we do have, like I said, another monthly community conversation coming up in February. And all of that information can be found on our website. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. And if you go to our website and go to our events calendar, you can go ahead and see any upcoming trainings that we have, or any events that we might be in the community that you would like to learn more information about. We have some upcoming trivia events, etc. But our upcoming community conversation will be on February 16th at 11 a.m. as well. So if you need any information, like I said, feel free to visit our website. The national numbers and local numbers are listed, or local contact information is listed in the chat. Are there any other questions from anyone? Okay, I guess thank you both for your time. When you exit the meeting, you will receive a survey for feedback. So please, if you get an opportunity to just fill that out. And thank you to everyone so much for your time, and hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks
you
for the
all.
opportunity.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Take care.
Thank you, you too.